This is Of Men and Dragons, Chapter 29 by DrBlackJAck21. Fayen, Telron, and the other three workers sat around the fire inside the building they had put up not long ago. They were listening to Lonthal's explanations of Shahar's offer. As soon as he finished, one of the workers jumped up.
I came out here to work for the human and his dragon magic, not a couple of orphan females. We should take them up on their offer and return to the village once the snow thaws.
The worker seemed oblivious to Fayen's upraised eye ridge at his emphasis on the word females. There was some muttering around the campfire before Lonthal spoke up again.
If you're worried about them fulfilling their part of the deal, I can promise you that they have the resources to make good on their payment. I'm telling you, their home is unlike anything I've ever seen. It's more extravagant than any lord's manor I know of.
The same worker growled back,
That's another thing. If they have so much, why aren't they sharing more with us?
Fayen looked thoughtful, with her chin resting on her palm, and spoke in a quiet voice that forced everyone else to be silent to hear what she had to say.
I'm not sure I'd say they haven't. They gave us these coats, which are better quality than any garment I've ever seen, and we get to keep them even if we do leave early. We have these tents of similar quality, which we can also take with us now that the first building is complete. We now have living quarters that are sturdier, better insulated, and easier to maintain than anything we've ever had, and we were taught how to make more. Not to mention how much metal they've supplied to our village, which is comparable to what an entire summer's worth of gathering would have provided. Who knows what's next?
Several heads around the campfire were nodding in agreement when Telron added his thoughts.
There's also the breakfasts and dinners we've been getting. Those are better than anything I've ever eaten as an apprentice. Sometimes I wonder if Lord Angles eats this well. Also, Jack hinted at some new alloys I'm excited to try out. I'm sticking around to see what comes next.
More heads were nodding emphatically now, and the voice of dissent found himself alone with his opinions. With a huff and a grumble, he retreated to his sleeping area. With the big decision out of the way, and it being too cold and wet to work outside this late into the day, the workers settled in for a more relaxed conversation. One of the younger workers prodded Lonthal before speaking.
Tell us more about that house of theirs. What else did you see?
Like all hunters, Lonthal enjoyed telling a good tale around a fire. His eyes lit up as his arms started gesturing.
I know I described all the metal, but the surfaces without metal were covered in even more luxurious materials. The seats were more comfortable than the softest churlish fur.
As Lonthal started working his story up, Fayen settled in to listen to the excited youth's story. He was good at painting a picture with words, even if he exaggerated a little here and there. But, to be fair, every hunter she'd known was much the same. She couldn't help but wonder which parts of this story were exaggerated and which parts were accurate. Knowing Jack, maybe Lonthal didn't have to exaggerate very much for a change. Angela decided they all needed a night of relaxation after the last couple of days. She put on a movie with a dashing young hero. Shahar felt a pain in her chest during several romantic portions of the movie and couldn't help but compare Jack to the film's main character. From speaking with Angela, Shahar had gathered that Jack had been every bit as much the quiet and unassuming individual that the main character of this movie had been. They both were dropped into worlds that left them completely in over their heads, and while Jack had never been as suave as the character in the movie became, they'd both risen to meet whatever challenges had been thrown their way. Shahar found herself tearing up at the climax of the film, wondering if Jack would ever show up to save the day again. Never mind the fact that Shahar had to save Jack just as often as the reverse. Embrel seemed to see many of the things Shahar had.
It's like someone took Jack and made a movie about him. Except they made him younger, better looking, a better fighter, taller.
Angela cut Embrel's list short with an objection.
Hey, Jack is my brother, and I know him better than anyone.
So I can definitely say they also made him more likable, more coordinated, and gave him a sexier accent. There was a bit of tension behind the good-natured ribbing. It was traditional to do this kind of thing in front of Jack so he could sputter indignantly in self-defense. Still, Shahar knew Jack would approve of being the butt of a joke if it meant the return of smiles and laughter to the house, even if it was all a little forced. She smiled as she saw things from Jack's perspective once again. Her respect and fondness for him only seemed to grow as she noticed all the little things he regularly did that were only apparent now that he wasn't here to do them anymore. There were so many small moments where a brief pause felt out of place because it would have typically been filled with some playful banter, encouragement, or insight that Jack would have thrown in seemingly without much thought. Shahar just wasn't good at such things. Still, they were all doing their best. The jovial feeling dimmed a little when one of those quiet moments went on a little too long. Finally, Emerald broke the silence.
Still, for his flaws, I wish Jack was here with us. He'd probably know just how to deal with Jack not being here right now.
Emerald's face scrunched up in confusion as even she tried to make sense of what she'd just said. Shahar cut her off before the younger Argun could try and start offering a clarification.
I know what you mean. I was just thinking of all the things he would do that we hardly noticed, but had a profound effect on everything around him. However, all we can do now is continue on and hope that he finds his way back to us.
Emerald looked a little somber as she replied.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but waiting is hard. I feel like I should do something right now, or maybe 10 things.
Shahar nodded her understanding.
That is normal for anyone waiting for change, good or bad. Soldiers feel it before a battle. Parents feel before birth. Even animals feel it before a storm. The worst thing you can do is exhaust yourself with worry before you ever get the chance to act.
Shahar sighed, speaking to herself as much as Emerald as she continued.
For now, we stick to Jack's plan and move forward. We'll have to keep an eye out for any new problems or challenges that arise as we proceed.
Emerald nodded her understanding, although she couldn't help but think that understanding and acting on that understanding were two very different things. Still, she'd do her best. She could almost hear Jack tell her that's all he'd ever ask. Emerald finished cleaning up and took a second shower for the day. There was something about warm water and solitude that brought peace of mind in stressful times, although even that wasn't enough to quell all of her worries. She mentally repeated her new mantra to herself.
Just do your best.
Toweling off, she noticed Shahar wasn't in the living room or their bedroom. There was only one other place Emerald could think Shahar might be, and sure enough, she was in the medbay. Angela appeared in front of the girl and held a finger in front of her lips, telling Emerald to be quiet so as not to disturb Shahar. Slowing to a halt, just shy of the room's entrance, Emerald could hear Shahar's voice softly wafting out. She was talking to Jack. For just a moment, Emerald's heart fluttered in hope before settling down with the realization that Angela would have certainly told her if Jack had woken. Almost too faint to be heard, Shahar continued her one-sided conversation.
And you should have seen Emerald. She was so nervous when she spoke, but she had Lonthal in the palm of her hand the whole time. Did you know she had a crush on her? Is that part of the reason you are always so protective of Emerald around him? Anyway, Angela seems to think things are going well, all things considered. Still, I wish you were here to help. We all do. We're all doing our best, but it would be so much easier with you at our side. Wherever you are, don't stop trying to find your way back. We need you. I need you.
Emerald backed away to give the two of them a bit more time alone together. Angela watched as, after a little time passed, Emerald returned, but this time her arms were filled entirely with blankets and pillows. Soon she'd set up a relatively comfortable bed for Shahar. In doing so, the young girl found there was no room left for anyone else. Emerald returned to her own room with a shrug of her shoulders, though she was hardly alone. As her eyes started to close and her voice hinted at yawns to come, the young girl called out,
"Angela, tell me a story."
Through her eyelids, Emerald could see the gentle glow that meant Angela had materialized. Without opening her eyes, she turned her head to face the AI, a small smile of anticipation on her lips, and waited as any attentive listener would while waiting for the storyteller to pick an appropriate tale. Angela knew the girl was mostly seeking company. She'd grown accustomed to Shahar's presence at night. In this instance, Angela was more than happy to oblige.
"All right. Let me tell you the tale of an intelligent but mischievous human boy, his stuffed tiger and imaginary friend, and a few of the many adventures they went on together."
Emerald snuggled down into her blankets in a manner so cute that one of Angela's processors simulated her heart skipping a beat. While she turned some of Jack's favorite childhood comics into a story worth listening to, Angela also kept an eye on Jack and Shahar. It would probably be a good idea to remove Jack into a proper bedroom with the few pieces of medical equipment required to keep him stable. Otherwise, Shahar would probably camp out in the medbay every night. She supposed that was a concern for tomorrow. Tonight, Angela simply enjoyed the small moments shared between herself and Emerald, as well as Jack and Shahar. The next morning, Emerald had a bit of her morning cheer back. She wasn't exactly bouncing around the kitchen, but while she worked, she hummed a little tune that seemed to lack any measurable rhyme or reason. She made a bacon quiche to bring out and share with the workers while they all decided how to move forward. When Shahar was finally drawn out of the medbay by the wafting aromas, she looked better rested than she had the previous morning. Rather than letting her sit at the table like usual, Emerald loaded Shahar's arms up with baskets filled with food, plates, and eating utensils.
"It will be good for morale if the new camp leader goes out and eats with the workers. Besides, there's a lot of work that needs to be done. As you pointed out, sitting around and worrying about Jack won't help anyone, including Jack."
Her voice quieted.
"He's in the care of the best healer on the planet, and you can tell him all about your day tonight. It'll give you something to look forward to. Although, this time, I get a turn telling him about my day, too."
Shahar looked a little embarrassed about apparently being caught speaking to Jack last night, but it shortly faded after Emerald mentioned wanting her own turn. After a moment, she nodded in agreement.
"I think Jack would like that."
Emerald's face was contagious, and Shahar couldn't help but feel her spirits further buoyed by the infectious smile the younger girl sported as she spoke.
"I know he will. Now let's get going before the food gets cold."
Emerald's bravado started to fade as they approached the workers. It was easy to be bold in front of Jack, Shahar, and Angela, but being bold in front of a bunch of workers who were now looking at the two of them expectantly was completely different. Luckily, Shahar was more than up to the task and took charge. As the food distribution was being guided by a suddenly subdued Emerald, Shahar dove right into the discussion.
"I'm sure Lonthal has had a chance to tell you all about the current situation and our plans to move forward with this outpost. I'm sure you have many questions, but I want you to know I will honor Jack's promise to all of you. Anyone who wants to leave may do so, without reprisal, as soon as the road melts enough to travel. You will be given plenty of supplies for the journey, including enough heating packs to safely make it to the village."
Shahar looked around at the workers, who seemed more interested in the food than her speech. Only two met her gaze as she spoke, Fayen and one of the junior woodworkers. Fayen's eyes were calm and understanding. They didn't seem to harbor any discontent as far as Shahar could tell. The junior workers, on the other hand...
"I will be leaving. I didn't come out here to work with..."
He paused as he spared a furtive glance at Fayen, who returned his glance with an odd edge in her eyes before the worker turned back to Shahar. His voice suddenly a little less aggressive than a moment ago.
"With anyone other than Jack."
He was practically mumbling by the end. Shahar nodded. She wondered what the looks had meant, but decided to let it go. She was simply happy they'd only lost one worker. Jack's plans would still be on track with the remaining workforce. Instead, she nodded at the worker as she replied,
"All right. You are free to pass the remaining time however you wish. You will be fed and boarded until the snow melts. After that, I expect you not to stay longer than it will take you to prepare to travel back to the village."
The worker had seemed ready to fight, but instead just nodded and shrunk back to his sleeping area. Shahar turned her attention to the remaining workers.
"To the rest of you, let's talk about our plans for the future. I want your input on how to make this all happen by the end of the winter."
Everyone was digging into their food with eager abandon while she spoke. Everyone except Telron, who was staring intently at the knife and fork Emerald had handed him with his food.
"All right, but first I have to ask, what are these made of? They are far too light for how sturdy they are. Is this another of Jack's alloys?"
Emerald looked up before she realized what she was doing.
"Oh, these are made out of something called stainless steel. It's similar to regular steel, but the iron content is lower, something like 50%, and the chromium is closer to 30%. It's not quite as strong or hard as traditional steel, but requires much less maintenance for day-to-day use."
Emerald's voice faltered near the end when she noticed all the eyes were now staring at her, each with different expressions. The woodworkers looked a little lost, but there was a touch more respect there than she'd seen before. Lonthal looked proud and justified for some reason, but also seemed to glance over at Telron with an odd look of worry. Telron looked at the young girl as though she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen, before returning his gaze to the eating utensil as though they were holy artifacts. Finally, for her part, Shahar was simply beaming with pride and encouragement as she nodded approvingly at Emerald. For her part, Emerald simply wanted to fade back into the background, forgotten except as a supplier of food. Sadly, it didn't look like that would happen anytime soon, as Telron started bombarding her with questions about the forging and shaping process.